All right, let's dive into a really fascinating framework for marital intimacy, all drawn from the book Closer Than a Garment. Now, this isn't just a guide about the physical act itself. Instead, it weaves everything together: the philosophy, the etiquette, and even spiritual rituals. So let's explore how it connects all these different worlds. So, the whole thing really kicks off with this one central metaphor from the Quran, this idea of spouses being a garment for each other. It's just so powerful, right? It's not just about being physically close, it's about mutual protection, it's about comfort, and it's even about the beauty that you bring to each other's lives. Honestly, this one single idea is the key to unlocking the entire philosophy. Okay, so before we get into the nuts and bolts, the how-tos, the text first builds this really solid foundation. It's all about the why. It frames intimacy as something way, way more than just a physical act. And here's a core concept that completely flips the script on the topic. The source argues that within a marriage, fulfilling your sexual desire isn't just okay to do, it's actually seen as an act of worship. It's kind of like a form of charity that earns you a spiritual reward. And that just shifts the whole perspective, doesn't it? It goes from being a simple worldly pleasure to a spiritually meaningful act. This saying from the Prophet Muhammad really breaks down the logic behind that. The argument is simple but really powerful. It's like, look, if directing that desire towards something forbidden is a sin, that it just logically follows that directing that same desire towards your spouse, which is permissible, has to be a virtue that gets you a reward. All right, so with that big idea established, let's get practical. The source lays out a whole series of recommended practices, or etiquettes, if you will, and they're all designed to elevate the experience and line it up with these spiritual goals. And what's really striking is just how broad these etiquettes are. We're not just talking about the physical act. It all starts with your intention, why you're doing this. It includes making sure there's mutual pleasure and fulfillment. It talks about foreplay, maintaining privacy, and even beautifying yourselves for one another. The point is, these guidelines are totally holistic. They bring the emotional, spiritual, and physical all together. And get this, the text even points to a specific prayer to say before intimacy. The whole purpose is to bring God's name into the moment, to ask for protection for the couple and for any child that might come from it, from any kind of negative influence. It's a very deliberate way of spiritualizing a very physical moment. Now, the source doesn't shy away from the physical specifics either. There's this interpretation of a verse that calls a spouse a place of cultivation. And based on that, the understanding is that pretty much any position for intercourse is fine. So there's a huge amount of freedom and creativity there, but with one very clear boundary. The act has to be vaginal, because that's seen as the place of cultivation, where life can begin. Okay, so we've covered the recommendations and the freedoms. Now let's look at the other side of the coin, the clear boundaries. The text outlines specific acts that are prohibited, which creates a really clear framework of what's allowed and what's not. And the core distinction is actually pretty direct and simple. On one side, you have permission to approach the place of cultivation any way you want. On the other side, you've got two strict, hard and fast rules based on timing and location: no intercourse during menstruation and no intercourse via the anus. So let's break those down a bit. First, intercourse during menses is forbidden, and the text calls it a harm. But it also clarifies that other forms of intimacy that aren't penetrative are still totally fine. Second, anal intercourse is described in no uncertain terms as a major sin. And third, there's a prohibition that's all about trust. It is forbidden to expose the intimate, private details of your relationship to other people. It's also pretty interesting to see how the source tackles a more modern question. It presents oral sex not as strictly forbidden, but as a disliked or discouraged practice. And it comes with conditions. The main one being that it shouldn't involve swallowing any genital fluids, which are considered to be ritually impure. So after the physical act is over, the framework circles right back to a person's spiritual life. The source explains that there is a required ritual of purification that you have to do to transition from that physical state back to a spiritual one. And to get this, you gotta know this key term, janaba. Think of it as a state of major ritual impurity. It's caused by sexual intercourse or by ejaculation. And the crucial thing to know is that while a person is in this state, they can't perform formal acts of worship, like the daily prayers. So how do you leave that state of janaba? The answer is something called ghusl. This is a prescribed, full-body ritual bath. And this isn't just, hopping in the shower for a quick rinse. It's a specific act of purification that's designed to remove that state of ritual impurity, which then allows a person to get back to their prayers and other acts of worship. The book details the specific steps for this ritual. You start with an intention and wash your private parts. Next, you perform the standard ablution, wudu, just like you would for prayer. After that, you pour water over your head 3 times, making sure it gets down to the roots of your hair. Then you wash your entire body, starting with the right side. And finally, you move to a clean spot and wash your feet. You can see it's a very structured and deliberate process. And here's a really crucial point the text makes. This ritual bath, ghusl, becomes required for both the husband and the wife simply because intercourse happened. It's required even if neither person reaches the point of ejaculation. So when you put it all together, what do you have? You have this complete, totally integrated system. The framework in Closer Than a Garment doesn't treat sexuality as some separate, isolated thing. No, it weaves it directly into the fabric of a person's spiritual life. It creates this direct, unbreakable link between the most private physical act and the most central spiritual duties, like prayer. And that kind of leaves us with a final question to think about. What does this kind of direct, procedural link between physical intimacy and a spiritual ritual tell you about a worldview? What does it say about how life's different areas, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, are seen not as separate boxes at all, but as deeply and fundamentally interconnected?